We are really excited to have a number of guests and speakers here on the session, and we'll get to introductions just after we go over a few background items. So the goal and our goal for this session is to cover a number of concepts that are specific to those of you in Ohio, including understanding the universe of service providers and soil health networks around the state of Ohio, understanding the ways that landowners and operators can engage with various service providers, like the ones we have with us today, and brainstorming ways to find mentors and who people might work with to focus on soil health. So thank you all so much for being here. We also want to deepen the understanding of available technical and financial resources for soil health, and have a collaborative discussion about addressing barriers and expanding adoption of soil health practices on permanently protected farmland. So let's start right in with introductions. Some of you who are participants in the training have gotten to meet each other, but we have some new faces on the call this morning. So I'm gonna call on individuals if you could just say your name and your organization and role, that would be great. Carrie Cusick.
I guess that means you want me to unmute. Good
That's
afternoon.
Right, yeah.
Hello, my name is Carrie Cusick, and I am the Assistant State Conservationist for Programs for NRCS. I'm acting in that position right now.
Thank you. Barbara Baker.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Baker, the Assistant State Conservationist for Natural Resources, and I run the easement programs in Ohio.
Eric Schwab.
Yes, my name is Eric Schwab. I'm the acting state resource conservationist. I had to think about it. I hadn't been acting too long, but yes, I'm here representing Ohio NRCS also.
Steve Baker.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Baker. I'm the state soil scientist for Ohio, and I deal with soil health and farm bill compliance. Thank you.
Kip Studer.
I'm Kip Studer from Ohio Department of Agriculture, Division of Soil and Water Conservation. I'm a nutrient management specialist up here in the Western Lake Erie Basin, Northwest Ohio.
Jeff Giesecke.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeff Giesecke. I'm a district technician with the Putnam Soil and Water Conservation District.
Emily Lipstrew.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to see some familiar faces and names. Emily Lipstrew. I'm the Policy Director with the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association.
Caitlin Brown.
I'm Caitlin Brown. I'm the Land Protection Specialist at Three Valley Conservation Trust.
Maureen Orndorff.
Hi, I'm the Watershed Coordinator with Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District, and I'm sorry, I'll need to leave a little after 3.
All right, thanks. Lauren Giesing.
Hi, my name is Lauren Jessing, and I am the Land Preservation Specialist with Tecumseh Land Trust.
Thanks. Caitlin Ormsby.
Hi, Caitlin Ormsby. I'm with Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District in Ohio.
Roxanne.
Hi, my name's Brock. I'm from Madison County, and I work with the Soil and Water Conservation District there.
Thanks. Noelle O'Neill.
Hi, sorry my video doesn't work. I'm Noelle O'Neill. I'm the land manager for Cardinal Land.
Fabulous. Is there anyone else whose name I missed?
I'm Michelle Burns. I'm the Executive Director of Tecumseh Land Trust.
Welcome. As we talked about, one of our key goals for this session is to strengthen connections with the network of resource providers in the state, and the Natural Resource Conservation Service is certainly one of those important providers. So I am going to turn the microphone over to Eric Schwab and Steve Baker from the NRCS to share about technical and financial resources available through NRCS.
Hi, everybody. This is Steve Baker, and I guess I'm starting this off, so I'm sharing my screen now. Hopefully, everybody should see a PowerPoint going on.
Yes.
Great. So we have this split up in two parts, and mine's just kind of an overview of Ohio soils and resource concerns. And then Eric will pick up with his part about how we address the resource concerns. So without further ado, I'll get moving. Maybe. There we go. So a little bit about our campaign. We're always looking to push soil health, and they unlock the secrets of the soil. It's probably changed a little bit from this one, but I didn't want to go digging for yet another slide. So, we're always pushing our soil health, and part of the reason we do that is, we want to make sure everybody's clear about soil as a finite resource, that we can't replenish it by natural processes quicker than it erodes. So we want to push the point that we can improve soil condition, but replacing inches and let alone feet, it's difficult, maybe impossible. So just a brief overview, it seems like we've got folks from all over Ohio. Ohio is one of the most interesting places to work, if you ask me, just because we've got a little bit of everything. Urban pressure to surface mining. We have very different soils based on our glacial maps. So there's no shortage of issues and different soils to deal with. So, as a rough idea there in the northwest corner, you can see in blue, that's when Lake Erie was 5 times its current size. And, so it's the big lake plain section of Ohio, clayier at the surface, and, loamier as you go down. So it has its own set of resource concerns. As you move to the central west part of the state, you can see all of the green lines. Those are all glacial maximums, so to speak. As the glacier pushes down, it leaves these ridges or moraines, and it retreats, pushes forward again, leaves all these. So that's where you get that little bit of roll to the central western part of the state. But these again are all glacial till soils over there. So they have their own issues also, of course. In the southwest part, closer to Cincinnati, a little bit to the east, these are all loess or windblown silt soils. And they have a more wind erodible problem. They do tend to be low in strength. So we treat them a little bit differently than the other soils we just talked about. Northeast Ohio and the Cleveland corridor, so to speak, there's more eskers and outwashes with sands, and there's still glacial till. And if you can take a moment and kind of split Ohio right down the middle, if you would fold it north to south like a piece of paper, the west side of the state is much more strongly dominated by dolomite soils. On the east side, you have more shales and sandstone. And then everything in that southeast part is the unglaciated bedrock controlled soils there. So kind of wanted to show that as a rough idea of what we deal with. And you can see the glacial map kind of make its next step into the soil regions. And I, again, kind of explained them already, but you've got the lake plain, the till plain. There's actually some pockets of the lake plain that show up where, as the glacier stopped and between the two moraines, there was actually a lake environment. So there are parts of Union and Champaign County that those soils don't react the same way that the till plain do in the rest of the county. So, again, things that we try to think about as NRCS and what are the resource concerns we want to deal with. So, the soil survey is pretty good about giving you percent sand, silt, and clay, depth to limiting layers, parent materials, water table depths. All of those are good things to know when you're dealing with conservation. But, moving on, we also have dynamic properties. And that's really what we're trying to influence with soil health. We want to build organic matter. We want better structure. biologic activity picking up has an effect on structure and bulk density. Cation exchange capacity and anion exchange capacity are both built up by having soil health practices in place. So these are all things that we're driving for more or less as an economic / environmental benefit to everyone. So just some quick thoughts there. You know, diversity is kind of the norm in your average system in the world there. You know, you don't go to too many forests that are dominated by one type of tree. You have understory, overstory, that sort of thing. And that's why those environments tend to have more diversity in their soil properties. So, you know, we're always pushing plant diversity and soil health. You know, want to keep it covered to cut down on erosion. We want the different fungal networks to work in the soil to, again, affect that structure and bulk density issue, to try to make for better drainage as we need it, those sorts of things. And, you know, sometimes it's really simple. I mean, it's just getting somebody to go to corn and beans rotation, but we can make it a lot more complex by moving on to cover crops with 10 different species in it to try to, again, keep that diversity going and get soil development. So another question is, you know, is it the right purpose? Are we doing the right thing with these? This is the Palouse area of the Northwest. You know, they have a lot of erosion issues. Maybe that's not the best way to use it. I don't know. I'm not from there. I shouldn't guess. But, you know, that is something we try to drive in our conservation planning side. Are you farming the right product for your area? You know, is a change in product yield something you're driving for? Or are you looking to get into something completely different? And how can we tailor your system to make that work? So talking about water effects, you know, that's something else we drive after. And, you know, erosion is always an issue. And if you kind of break it down to an acre inch of water, that's about 100 tons of water hitting the soil at 20 miles an hour. You know, when you kind of break it down that way, it's a very different world. And that's why I have that picture of the sheep's foot roller there. That's essentially what we're doing, is individual impacts are causing crusting and compaction. So trying to keep it covered, again, with those diverse cover crops or diverse crops, whatever it may be, helps to prevent that effect of water on bare ground. I just threw this one in here because I always like that picture. We think of erosion a lot on soils that are steep and sloping, highly erodible land in our lingo, but it happens everywhere. So the things we do for soil health and conservation planning definitely can play in to lessen these sorts of resource concerns. And I'll stop now for any questions. And I'm not hearing any, so I'm about to do my anchorman thing and say, over to you, Eric.
Okay, Steve. I think we're just gonna have Steve run the slide, so you'll have to forgive me for saying the next slide. That was really a good introduction, Steve, to kind of the next step of you know, that meeting some of your guys' goals here for this session. You know, and I'm going to talk about some of the opportunities that we have for producers, you know, for really implementing these soil health systems through some of our financial assistance program. So with that, Steve, if you can, thank you. I probably won't say thank you every time, sorry. So fundamentally, to what we do here at NRCS is always based on conservation planning. You know, conservation planning ends up being kind of the foundation for any of our financial assistance programs. And I'm not sure how much you guys talked about this in your other sessions, but what conservation planning is in a nutshell is we work individually with individual landowners to develop a system of practices to address those identified resource concerns that really meets the needs of the producers. Steve did a great job talking about how diverse Ohio soils are and kind of, you know, our soil properties, and just it's always amazing to me geologically how diverse Ohio is, but our producers are just as diverse in a lot of ways. And sometimes not everything works well in their system that they want to implement. So, you know, this conservation planning process, we work with that producer to find something that not only will help the land, but will work within their their normal or their production practices that they're pursuing. And eligible producers that are interested in installing these eligible practices as part of that conservation plan will be ranked and evaluated for possible funding. So with that, Steve,
sorry,
the next slide. Oh, you're just keeping me awake over here.
Yeah, there you go.
So we have a lot of kind of tools in our toolboxes that we call conservation practices and enhancements that as planners we can use to fit the needs of the land, to fit the needs of the producer. So I've just listed, a few of our popular ones, the ones that we think about when we think about implementing soil health systems, and that's crop rotation, our residue management practices, no-till or reduced tillage, nutrient management, cover crops, obviously, amending soil properties with gypsum, controlled traffic, pasture and hayland planting, and pest management. And this is just a few of kind of our annual practices that we work with those producers on those annually planted cropland. Steve, if we can go on. So now let's transition to talk about our financial assistance programs. We have two kind of major financial assistance programs when we think about working with producers to implement soil health, and that's EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentive Programs, and the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP. And these really are the ways that we get these conservation plans on the ground with producers. Go on to the next slide. So when we talk about the Environmental Quality Insurance Program, or EQIP, the purpose of this is to provide payments to assist producers in implementing practices to treat resource concerns. Like you alluded to at the beginning, sometimes there's some financial considerations, there's some risks where producers change things, and we through our programs and the EQIP can help offset that risk for a transition period. So these EQIP contracts are anywhere from 1 to 10 years in length, depending on how long it will take them to implement the conservation plan, and we pay payment rates are 75 to 90% of the average cost of the installation. So when we think about annual plan practices, like most that were on that list, we can pay most of them we can pay up to 3 times in a row to help them transition to that. There's a few that we can plan and provide incentives a little bit longer than 3 years, but generally it's a 3-year kind of adoption period, so they get comfortable. And again, the eligible practices are stuff that are newly adopted. It's not for things that they've already adopted. EQIP is designed to help them transition into kind of a higher level of management, a higher level of soil health. If you go on to the next slide. So now let's talk about the other program, the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP. It helps producers maintain and improve their existing resource concerns and adopt additional conservation practices to address those priority natural resource concerns. These are structured a little bit different in that they are 5-year contracts with an opportunity for them to re-enroll for an additional 5 years. And the participant earns payments associated not only with those existing, adopting new things, but there's a payment associated with their existing performance. So when we think of CSP contracts, these are maybe people that are further along on their soil health journey and maybe are just adding some additional things, but really are addressing a lot of those resource concerns to begin with. So if we flip on to the next slide there. So if we think about the payments associated with adapting the new things, and I created this slide just to give you a comparison of both EQIP and CSP, a few of our popular more used practices. So for a crop rotation, it's a $10 an acre payment in EQIP, and for CSP, it's a $10 to $20 an acre. For no-till, it's 15 and 4, as you can see. Nutrient management has a really wide range there. You can see in EQIP, it's 10 to 50 and 15 to 20 in CSP. And that's because we offer a whole suite things within nutrient management, whether that's a real basic kind of traditional blanket applications to a higher end variable rate applications with deep placement of all their nutrients. So there's a vast difference in some of the cost depending on what the producer is willing to adopt. You can see the cover crop payment. Again, there's some differences between EQIP and CSP, and that has to do with how we calculate it a little bit different in CSP. Gypsum is something that we offer only in EQIP, and controlled traffic, helping those producers manage their passes so they're not compacting their whole field. Now, all of these payments were the 2021 payment rates. We're about to release the 2022, and again, these vary a little bit from year to year. So when those are likely to change, but the minor for the next year. So if we go on to the next slide, Steve. So I said in CSP, it was a little bit different because there was the payment that we just talked about for adopting new activities, but there's also the existing activity payments. So on land that becomes payable or eligible, which you have to adopt at least one new practice on that land, we pay a blanket $7.50 a year per acre for cropland. And farmstead, you can see the pasture is $3 and associated ag land, and the non-industrial private forestry is 50 cents. In addition to that per acre payment, there's an additional payment for every resource concerns that you meet at the time of the applications, which is $300 per resource concern per year. There's, depending on the land use, there's off the top of my head, I think there's 10 to 7 or 8, depending on the resource concerns. So you can see this existing conservation payment activity, depending on the operation and what level of management they are at the time that they make the application. This can be a significant part of that payment. So if we go on to the next slide. So how do these programs work? Interested producers, when you're talking to producers, and they're interested in some of this, they should really reach out to our local field offices. Generally, we have field offices in most counties in Ohio, and they will set up a time where they'll have kind of a one-on-one conversation with that producer to kind of start that planning process to evaluate what they need, what the soil needs, and their goals. Then that planner will present, the variety of options that could be EQIP or CSP or maybe both for them to consider. And if that producer is willing to make a decision, to continue on to implement that conservation plan, they'll be ranked, and if selected for funding, a contract will be offered. So that was in a nutshell, probably a little overwhelming. I don't know if I have one more slide here, Steve, or not. But hopefully that gives you just a little bit better and stimulate some questions and stuff for our discussion a little bit later.
Fabulous. Thank you, Eric. I'm just going to check my other screen to see if we might have any questions. There's the Zoom chat, but then there's a separate chat on Pathable. So folks can feel free to put questions in either place. So far, we don't have any, but so that means we'll go on to Kip Studer from the Ohio Department of Agriculture. And go ahead, Kip.
Oh, thank you, Kara. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. As she said, I'm Kip Studer, nutrient management planning person up here in Northwest Ohio. And I really wanted to just talk about one, Division of Soil and Water Conservation. First off, I know there's several folks on here from Soil and Water District, so you're probably well aware of what the Division of Soil and Water Conservation does, and I'm sure that most others have a decent idea on what we do at the division. But for those who don't, I went back to our mission statement of to provide leadership, services, and enable Ohioans to conserve and protect and enhance soil. And I think that is really important for this conversation, is to enhance soil. And so when I was putting these slides together, that really made me think of the approach of soil health and what we're trying to accomplish by improving soil health. And so I had that in the back of my mind as I was putting these slides together. In addition to doing what is required by Ohio Revised Code for the division, we oversee soil and water districts. We oversee conservation works of improvement. We did a lot of the soil mapping back with NRCS back several decades. And also we're responsible for voluntary nutrient management planning and the pollution abatement rules in the state of Ohio to protect those natural resources here within the state. Some of the financial assistance that we offer is H2OHIO, which I'm going to go pretty in depth at today with H2OHIO and that program. We also have our ag pollution abatement programs, which provide some funding for correcting issues on livestock farms, typically or erosion issues, and then also like cover crop programs. We work very well with like the Muskegum Conservancy District, and they offer a cover crop program. And then also all the other programs we try to support that our soil and water districts put out there annually. So there are many opportunities for landowners to get information from the soil and water district. And the best way to do it, like Eric said, is just stop in the office to see what new programs they might have at any point in time, because a lot of soil and water districts are working on other projects locally that we are not seeing from the state level. And I'm sure Jeff will get into some of that, because Putnam County has done a great job of doing other projects and grants. So I'll let him discuss that later. So H2OHIO is probably our #1 focus right now. It was an initiative launched by Governor DeWine in 2019. And at that point, my job and role shifted significantly. And that initiative was to use science-based practices to address water quality issues within Ohio's waterways, fix infrastructure, and everything else involved with that, put some wetlands out there to improve water quality, and all those numerous tactics that we can do to address water quality. And so they assigned this to the Department of Ag, the Department of Natural Resources, and the EPA, Ohio EPA. And so back in 2019, they released this program and the idea behind it, and we were tasked within several months to put together our portion of H2OHIO. And so probably in about 3 or 4 months, we worked very, very diligently to put together our handful of practices from an agronomic standpoint to be implemented on farm ground in the Western Lake Erie Basin to address water quality issues. H2OHIO is a water quality initiative, but I feel that the practices that we have put together can also help address a lot of soil health concerns. And so that is one of the things where we feel it is really important and can meet a landowner or a farmer's goals of achieving soil health along with trying to improve water quality. And I think they go hand in hand when we're looking at trying to accomplish goals. So I'm going to go the opposite direction as Eric did, and I'm going to give you some of the background about the program and then kind of go into the different practices. And so up here in Northwest Ohio, we have about 5.8 million acres of cropland that would be eligible in the project area. In 2020, we launched in the green counties you can see here. It was all 24 counties within the Maumee Basin. And then here in July, we rolled out to the next 10 counties that are highlighted in blue. And so we have an ongoing application period in those 10 counties. And then we're also going to reopen applications within the original 14. And so we're excited about that too. So here we go. We have the green counties are the Maumee Basin, and they're the original 14. And then the blue are the next 10. And so this is currently our project area. I know with some of the other programs at the DNR and EPA, they have expanded statewide. Ultimately, our goal and hope is to expand statewide, but right now we're focusing here in the Western Lake Erie Basin. for the time being. So as I stated, it is a nutrient reduction program. Our primary focus is implementing practice with a focus on phosphorus reduction and also nitrogen reduction. And so when we look at these practices, there is a lot of overlap between the practices and soil health practices. And so when we look at the practices that Eric presented, you're going to see a lot of similarities there. And we feel that these practices can help a producer or a landowner meet their soil health goals if that's what they're trying to accomplish on their land. And so I just quickly want to go through the practices. The first one we have is VNMP development, and that's voluntary nutrient management plan development and implementation. And so then we pay $10 in the 10 current counties, and we paid $2 previously for the development and implementation of a nutrient management plan. We have slightly different payment schemes within the two areas, and so I didn't want to put them up there to confuse everyone. But the local districts work through those payment schemes based on whatever county they are in. And really what that nutrient management plan is trying to do is set that path. Like Eric and Steve said, you really want that plan there to determine what that landowner's goals are. Both landowners and producers are eligible for this program. A large percentage of the participants in H2OHIO are producers, but we do have a handful of landowners that are participating, whether it be they have someone custom farm for them, but landowners are eligible and producers are eligible also to complete those practices on a landowner's property. But going back to the key aspect of a voluntary nutrient management plan is this is really setting the course of action to determine what practices a producer or a landowner wants to do on their land. And so we really feel that it's important to plan that out prior to executing that plan. And so we spent some extra time working on that plan and developing it. And then we also pay them an incentive for implementing it over the 2 to 3 years that they're contracted for. So we have that voluntary nutrient management plan, and then we kind of add practices or combine practices to help them meet the goals of what they're trying to do on their farm. And so we have a variable rate application phosphorus. This is spreading phosphorus fertilizer where it is needed on the land based on soil tests. And so we use that to implement that nutrient management plan. From a subsurface phosphorus placement standpoint, that is placing phosphorus beneath the surface in more or less an alternative method. Instead of broadcasting it on the top, we are injecting it or strip tilling it into the ground to place it down there where reduce that risk of offsite movement. The next two practices are manure incorporation. In the Western Lake Erie Basin, we have seen an increase in manure usage, and so we want to reduce our environmental risk when we're talking about manure. And so one of the ways to do that is incorporating it. And so we feel that incorporating manure is our best way to reduce our phosphorus risk when we're looking at that nutrient. And so we see a lot of value of incorporating manure into the plan. The next two practices kind of go together. Small grains, that's putting a crop like wheat or cereal or rye back into rotation, and it really opens the door for some of our manure incorporation practices. So those two really go together, that small grains and manure incorporation kind of go hand in hand. And then on top of that, our manure incorporation practice requires a cover crop after that manure is put out there. And so with that program and combination of practices, our small grains, then our manure incorporation, then our overwintering cover crop, we can have that soil covered for a large percentage of 18 to 20 months. And so we feel that that's really doing the soil health aspects and improving our aspects and improving that soil. And so we really feel that that is a good practice for both phosphorus management and soil health. The final practice we have is that cover crop rotation forages. that's just implementing a forage on those acres that has not been, that were not in forages previously. And so we know there's a lot of value from a soil health standpoint of putting a long-term perennial crop out there that will be out there for several years. And so it's required to be out there a minimum of 2 years, and you can receive payment up for 3 years, but potentially longer than that. And so we think this suite of practices does a pretty good job of addressing both phosphorus needs, and hopefully, if someone was interested in trying to meet their soil health needs, we could use these practices to help them accomplish that also. The final slide I had was we had received some criticism that this H2OHIO was not a soil health program, and I guess when we took a look at the pillars of, or the principles of soil health, we really felt that it was and can help a person accomplish those soil health goals of minimizing disturbance, maximizing cover, maximizing biodiversity, and the presence of living roots. And so we feel that if you implement the suite of practices or several of these practices, you could help accomplish your goals of soil health. And so I'll leave it at that. But I really feel that, yes, it is a phosphorus reduction program, but I think it really can help a producer or a landowner accomplish their goals when we're looking at soil health. And so I guess with that, here's my contact information, and I will stop sharing.
Thanks for your presentation, Kip. I was just wondering if you had any data, and I realize it's hasn't been a long-term project yet to have a lot of data, but what information you have so far on the kind of practices that are being incentivized that farmers are adopting the most?
So the key requirement is that voluntary nutrient management plan. And so we have approximately 1 million acres under that nutrient management plan. We're still in the application period for these next 10 counties. I think we have about another 300,000 acres in those 10 counties, but we're in the middle of sign up now, so none of those numbers are final. Overall, the fertilizer practices of variable rate spreading, that's been pretty widely accepted. Placement would follow that, but the cover crops have been very, very high, and I think we have about 450,000 acres in that cover crop practice over the 3-year contract period. So I guess that's an exciting opportunity for us to see those cover crops going out there year in and year out, and seeing that the soil protected for that long a time. And like I said, it is from the combination standpoint, we're seeing lots of people put multiple practices out there, and I guess that's what we're really seeing. I know NRCS really pursues these suite of practices, and I think that's what we were trying to accomplish with this program also, is putting multiple practices out there over the contract period.
Thanks, Kip. Noel, do you want to ask your question about NRCS about estimating the financial help, and maybe I'll even add to that, what are estimating the chances that a given farmer will have their practice selected by NRCS? So go ahead, Noel.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. One thing that we're trying to do is kind of be like upfront about how much it'll cost and trying to lay out resources. So I guess it would be helpful to get an idea of like how likely people are to get funding, and also how much for a specific farm. Is there like a tool or a strategy we can use?
I'll probably let Carrie weigh in on this too, but the idea that we start with a conservation plan based on that need and the producer's need, and there's not a really simple, easy way to give an estimation other than just start working with that producer. I'm sure Carrie maybe will want to weigh in on this. Clearly we get more requests in most years than we have money, but it's kind of hard to say odds, I guess. I don't know, Carrie, if you want to weigh in on
So-
that.
So Eric is right. It's really challenging for us to say you're going to get funded and you're not going to get funded, because our money is split into a lot of different funding pools, some focusing on forestry, some on cropland, some on wildlife, some on livestock practices. So we split our money up so we can kind of spread it around and help as many different kinds of people and types of producers, I guess is what I'm trying to say, types of producers that we can. How all of our programs work in terms of the financial assistance program, so CSP and EQIP, it's all done on a ranking system. So you come in and work with your local office, and they will help you. They will know an approximate amount your contract could be worth. Based on experience, a lot of them will be able to say, this is a pretty strong effort. This is not such a strong effort. Like Kit mentioned, we kind of like a suite of things. We want you to do, 3 or 4 things together that work to solve multiple resource concerns, and as opposed to just one practice and one little thing. And so I guess for us, we can't say how much or how often you might get selected off of one of the lists, but you would know how much financial assistance you would be eligible for based on your meeting with the district conservationist or the resource conservationist in that particular county that you're working in.
And do those visits and those kind of like consultations cost anything, like the farmer anything?
No, ma'am. We are free. Technical assistance is free. Applying for financial assistance is free. Nothing we do costs the producer any money out of pocket until they sign a contract. And when you sign a contract, like Eric's slide said, it was between 75 and 90%. There's usually some kind of out-of-pocket cost to install the practices, but not to get to that point. To get to that point, all of our services are all free. And you never pay us anything. You just pay your contractor or whoever you're working with to install them. You would get a portion from us and the producer would pay the remaining amount of that.
And the great thing about it, I always think, Carrie, is, all this information that the producer needs to make that decision is all given to them up before they sign that contract. So they really know what to give in. Those costs are based on some national and regional estimations. Sometimes it's more than what we say percentage wise. It's an average cost. Sometimes it's less, but they get to know, they have a good feel for it. So the best thing is just come visit us and start that conversation.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I was waiting to see if Eric was going to mention it. Our cost list, I don't know if you noticed this slide had a link to the cost list on the Ohio NRCS page. Each part of EQIP and CSP and RCPP and all the program acronyms that we use are listed there. And there's a link to the cost list that shows you how much per unit is available for the cost sharing side. So that's all publicly available and right out there on the web. And if you have a producer that is not as great using a computer, which we have a lot of them, you just go right into the office and the person in the office is happy to help you figure all of that stuff out.
Carrie, I'm glad you mentioned RCPP. We had a comment about that, so let's bookmark that. I wanted to ask Eric and Carrie, if a farmer puts in an application in 2021 and it's not awarded through the NRCS, do they start from square one in 2022, or is there any way to carry over some of the work that they put in?
So in general, the work carries over from year to year. We have little program tweaks, policy tweaks. Sometimes we tweak a practice list for a particular fund code. So in general, everything carries on. Anybody that applies, let's say you applied in 21 and you were not selected, you'll get a letter in October that says you were, just so you know, you were not selected for funding, and we're going to roll your application over to the next year. And, please get in touch with us if you don't want us to do that. And then at some point you'll get contacted by the local office. And the producer will get contacted by the local office to kind of work through that, maybe make changes or improvements to make them score higher, or maybe add something or take something out that maybe they decided they were going to go ahead and do something on their own. So we would take that out and maybe add something else or whatever. So that is something that carries from year to year, unless someone does not meet an eligibility item, in which case that is marked ineligible. It is not carried over, or you notify the office you want to cancel your application altogether. That is not carried over.
Great. Michelle Burns, go ahead.
Yeah, this is for Kip. I know that H2 Ohio was just opened up to the Ohio River Basin, and funding for future years isn't quite known. Do you have any predictions on when we might know what funding would look like for the rest of H2 Ohio?
So right now, the Department of Ag, we are using all our funds. We're focusing it in the Western Lake Erie Basin. I think DNR opened some wetland projects up in Southern Ohio or throughout the rest of the state. And I know EPA has done some projects in the Ohio Basin. But right now we are focusing all the money we have at the Department of Ag in those 24 counties. We do not know what the future will bring. I know I was with a state rep a couple weeks ago, and they're working on a bond issue to fund H2OHIO long term. I think that was a $100 million bond issue that they have been as a joint resolution in the state, and that would go to the voters to fund H2OHIO and practices. So as of right now, we're focusing all our current dollars in the Western Lake Erie Basin, but the hopes is to expand it in the future, depending on fund availability. With our focus on those 24 counties, we have the ability, you walk in the door, you're funded if you're eligible. We know as we expand out further, that might not be the case, and we have to go to more of a ranking or an applications like NRCS has through EQIP or CSP. So we know that time will come when it is a statewide program, but right now with the funding we have and the districts up here, we are able to take all the applications currently. If we get to the point that we're out of money, then we probably won't be able to do that. But right now it's been first come, first serve.
Michelle, you made another offer in the chat that I'm going to take you up on. So our friends from NRCS have talked about two programs specifically, EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. And those are two of the biggest programs through NRCS. But Michelle, you mentioned a third, and Carrie, you did too, the RCPP. So Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, so we got an RCPP grant to do both purchase conservation easements and have a specific pot for EQIP practices for a watershed around Yellow Springs, Ohio. And so it's been really nice because we've funded, I think, 8 EQIP projects that only people within that watershed can apply for. But then if they don't make the cut in that one, our district conservationist goes ahead and puts them in the general EQIP pot automatically. So it's been a really good competitive chance for these folks to get some EQIP funds. And we have that for 5 years, of course.
We will talk a little bit more about the RCPP in one of the morning sessions tomorrow, but I'll give NRCS a chance to talk more about that. I guess the Cliffs Notes that I've heard from people is that it's quite a bit of work on the front end to put together that application. But the plus side is there's a lot more certainty if you are awarded an RCPP grant for both easements and practices. You know that you have that pot of money available rather than sending someone into the office and hoping that either the easement or the practice gets funded. Anyone from NRCS want to say more about that?
Yes, so I can tell you nobody else is probably going to jump on here about RCPP. So RCPP stands for the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a program between USDA, NRCS, and a partner to work on whatever your specific project happens to be. It can be an easement-driven project. It could be a producer contract-driven project. It can be as small as a watershed. We have a couple that are multi-state that cover pieces of states or all of several states. And it works the rules are not exactly the same as EQIP and CSP, but it works similar in that we have a suite of practices that are available based on what your project is. You know, if you had a project that was based in forestry, then you would have a suite of forestry practices that you could offer. And yes, once you're awarded that money, it's a 5-year project, and then you have a budget for each year, and it's a lot of work on the front end. There's definitely some reporting pieces throughout the project that you have to do. But I think it's a really great way to marry leverage some dollars from the federal side and a partner side and kind of bring those together to have a bigger impact in a specific area, especially if it's, you know, a smaller watershed or whatever that may not have as much of an opportunity or be as competitive as, you know, an EQIP as some other places are.
Great. I want to make sure that we turn to the two other speakers that we have with us today, Jeff Giesecke and Emily Lipstrew. So I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and talk about the organization or organizations that you represent. Jeff is with the Putnam County Soil and Water Conservation District. And I asked him to also not only talk about Putnam County, but more broadly, the resources, technical and financial, that Soil and Water Conservation Districts statewide offer. So go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, thank you, Kara. So I appreciate being with you today. So mostly here in Putnam County, you know, we're in the Northwest Ohio area and the Western Lake Erie Basin. So we're really focusing a lot on H2OHIO. And Kip already mentioned the practices that are in H2OHIO. And of course, with being in the Lake Erie watershed and with water quality, not only in Northwest Ohio, but throughout the state, you know, throughout the nation, you know, water quality is really taking a front seat in what we do as soil and water, what NRCS does, what ODA, ODNR, you know, all of our partners are really, you know, that's on the front burner right now. And it has been for several years, and it always has been, but really came to the front here in the last 4 or 5 years, especially. So with H2OHIO, the soil health part of that and the practices in H2OHIO really will benefit the soil health. And I think there are stacks of research that would show an increase in soil health is a direct relationship to increase in water quality. You know, there are other factors, but if we can increase that organic matter, if we can increase that aggregate stability, like Steve was talking about in his first presentation there, you know, we can increase the infiltration and get the water to go down through the soil by increasing our soil health and giving the soil a chance to work on those nutrients and assimilate those nutrients as the water percolates down through the soil. I think we would agree that is the preferred method. And then, of course, with cover crops, with the no-till, with the small grains in the hay practices, keeping more cover on the ground is going to help. Also, then with the water that goes off the top of the surface of the ground, you know, the sheet flow in our storm events that you know, we all can and I think agree that our storms are a little bit more volatile now than what they were 25, 30 years ago. So that's a big component to it as well. So we talk about soil health, getting something on the soil, and then those roots working below the soil surface. So H2OHIO, Kip mentioned we did have some grants through the office. We were fortunate enough to get some grants to help implement some practices like 2-stage ditches. So the idea being you don't completely reconstruct the ditch, but you create benches and then seed those benches to a grass to help slow water down and to help filter water out once it gets in the ditch. other practices like we have some grant money or had some grant money for a wetlands. So we installed some wetlands here in the county, and we're fortunate to work with some of our other partners, Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, to install some wetlands. The practice that is a little bit new for us, but we have worked on some of it. A couple in the county here are the waterways where we cut out cells in the waterways, basically like putting a little wetland in the waterway itself. Up here in Northwest Ohio, our farm ground, or row crop agriculture. So farm ground is used for production agriculture. So it's very valuable. You know, farms are selling for $15,000, $12,000 an acre for farm ground. So to put a practice in, that's going to take out a minimal amount of land, like a waterway, to put a practice inside of that without taking other ground out of production is a benefit. So we were able to do some waterways like that. You know, I don't know how much time you want me to take here, Kara. If I thought you said about 5 minutes, so you let me know if I'm running over on my time.
I think that's been a great overview, and then you being here as we continue with the discussion will be just fantastic.
Okay, great.
Thanks. And Emily Lipstrew.
Thanks, Kara. It's good to be here and talk with you all this afternoon. As Kara mentioned, you know, I'm here with the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association. OFA has been around for over 40 years and works on organic and sustainable agriculture through a lot of education, advocacy, and public policy, both at the state and at the federal level. And I think one of the things that Kara wanted me to speak the most to is that OFA has been managing the Ohio Soil Health Initiative for probably over 1.5 years now, which is a group of organizations, agencies, farmers, and farm groups that are focused on what the state can do to support more utilization of good soil health principles. So, you know, this is something where over the past 1.5 years, we've been doing some listening sessions to hear from farmers, some of who are already participating in the H2OHIO program, as well as folks that aren't, to talk to farmers about what they're doing now, what they'd like to be doing more of, and what are some of the challenges that they face in kind of reaching the soil health goals that they have for their farm. And so it's been a process of just understanding a little bit of the lay of the land in Ohio and learning more about what we can do. We have a legislator in the State House that is interested in legislation to create a soil health task force, which would just further the opportunity to hear from farmers around the state, to look at what's been happening with H2OHIO currently, which again, I think has some great beginning points for looking at soil health, but was really designed initially to focus on phosphorus reduction, and how can we build on that to help farmers reach their soil health goals. You know, we're part of the National Healthy Soils Policy Network, which is a group of people who are working at the state level across the United States and have implemented a variety of different types of soil health policies and programs. And so I think we've got a lot of opportunity to look at what's been done in other parts of the country, to hear from farmers here in Ohio about some of those goals, challenges, and opportunities, and think about how we can do more. And I think, you know, Jeff started talking about this a little bit, and I think sometimes there's, you know, has been maybe a bit of a reluctance to, you know, talk about climate change directly, but I think that's becoming a little bit more commonplace now. And I know that, you know, we had over 150 farmers who kind of signed a pledge over 1.5 years ago to the federal government, basically a letter that was presented to the and I can't remember the exact committee name, but it was a subcommittee, a caucus working on climate and agriculture, and signed kind of a pledge to be part of the climate change solution. So whether it's being more resilient to more frequent weather extremes, or meeting other on-farm goals, this is an issue that a lot of farmers care about. They're very passionate about, so we want to help them do so. A couple other quick points I just wanted to hit on. One of the things that was talked about was this issue of whole farm systems planning, which NRCS has been doing a great job over the decades, and trying to promote whole farm planning, and it was also mentioned, this idea of integrated suites of practices. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about a couple of really important statistics that are germane in the state of Ohio. If you look at the last census of agriculture that was done by NASS, Ohio is 6th in the nation in the number of organic farms in the United States. We are 2nd in the nation in the number of farmland that's being transitioned to organic management systems. And I think that's important because, this is a voluntary, holistic program of suites of practices that work synergistically, providing multiple ecosystems benefits, providing greater resilience to both flood and drought situations. These organically managed soils tend to perform better in those situations. They certainly stand out when it comes to biological activity and soil tilth, which can help when it comes to erosion issues. So, it's I think it's important because it is a holistic program where each producer does an organic systems plan every year, which goes through at least a 3-stage review process and is inspected and verified through the USDA National Organic Program and accredited certifying agents, of which OFA is an accredited certifier, and we certify organic farms in 12 states across the Midwest. So, I say that not all of our farmers are organic. A lot of them are. We certainly are not saying everybody should be organic, but for those producers, and again, if Ohio's 2nd in the nation in the number or the amount of acreage that's being transitioned to organic management systems, maybe there are some things we can do to support those producers as they're making their changes. And again, we've spoken with a number of conventional producers who want to take their practices even farther and to achieve some of those soil health goals. So we're really interested in supporting them. We're working with folks in the state legislature. We're looking at, both state and federal resources that can support farmers in reaching those important goals. So I think that's enough of an intro for me, and I look forward to being part of the conversation.
Thank you so much. I have a question that is to all of you, everyone, both the presenters who have joined just for this session and those of you who are participating in the whole training. And that is, if we imagine that conversation with a farmer or landowner that we've been thinking about, one of the ways that we can start a conversation about soil health is inviting people to an event. And we talked a little bit in the last session about how to put on a good event, but there are also lots of events that are already happening that one might just let a farmer know about. So my question for all of you is, what organizations in Ohio put on really good field days and educational events? What are the kinds of events that you could invite a farmer to have them take one more step down the path of greater knowledge of soil health?
Well, I'll jump in very quickly here and just say that for decades, OFA has been partnering with the Ohio State University and also now with Central State University to provide an annual farm tour and workshop series We actually did a soil health farm tour up in Dalton, Ohio and Wayne County just a few weeks ago that was very well attended. So yeah, look for that.
People find out about that? You join the OFA mailing list or follow you on Facebook or?
Yeah, definitely any and all of the above.
Yeah, I can speak to that, and the OFA conference is definitely a great opportunity for producers. For another thing that comes to mind right off the bat is the Ohio No-Till Council. They have a website, and they host several events throughout the summer, kind of spread throughout the summer months throughout the state, and then they generally do a kind of a in-person meeting here close to Columbus in November, December. In addition to that, if a producer really wants to take a deep dive, I would suggest the conference at Ada. Somebody will have to help me. I'm having a brain freeze. The conservation tillage. Help me out, Jeff. Conservation.
Yeah, Conservation Tillage Technology Conference at ONU. At ONU, yeah.
And that's a really great deep dive into a lot of the science. 3 days, very well attended by producers and by people that are providing services to farmers. In addition, and Jeff probably could speak to this, the soil and water conservation districts locally often lead great programs and help people get lined up with local people, which is a key part of that. They need to get the connections locally and develop those relationships so these producers can help transition together.
Yeah, just to jump on that real quick, Eric. I'm sorry, Kara. I just wanted to put in a plug for Van Slack with Tuscaroras. He's Tuscaroras, right? Soil and Water. He's been doing a wonderful Farming After Dark series, which is just really great.
Could you say the name again?
It's the most recent iteration is called Farming After Dark. It's an evening series of different topics around kind of conservation. And that's with Muskingum Soil and Water Conservation District, I believe.
Yeah, I would say
a lot mention would be Farm Science Review. I mean, that's coming up here in a couple weeks, September 20th through the 23rd, 21st through the 23rd. That's near London, Ohio. So the Farm Science Review, there's just all kinds of opportunities there to gain knowledge. So that's coming up here recently. So that could be done here while maybe it's still fresh in some of your attendees' minds.
Let me ask Jeff, and then also to participants from Lake County and Madison County, do you do field days or on-farm events through the SWCD?
Well, yes, we typically will do what we call our county ag tour. And then we did a field day also this year where we met out at a local producer's shop and had about 125 people at that event. And so yes, we do have an annual event, and other soil and waters do the same thing. So yeah, your particular county, reach out to them and they can get you in touch with what's going on in your area.
Yeah, typically the best way is to get on their mailing list or follow them on the social media aspects or platforms and reach out to them that way. I know a lot of districts try to put that information out that way, but newsletters also are one they typically utilize. And I think a lot of our districts really pivoted well over the last year, trying to offer some outreach by virtually or other avenues to provide that outreach when we couldn't do our traditional field days. And we have some districts that put it on great field days to help educate. And so that was a transition for them. But I feel like the one that the Farming After Dark, I seen a couple of those, and it was a good shift of the traditional in-person meetings. So I think they've been very adaptive to trying to get some outreach out there.
Great. I know Lauren had a hand raised. Real quickly, I'm going to ask Brock or Caitlin Ormsby if you had anything to add from your respective counties.
Well, I will go first. Maureen had to leave. So I actually just started here in February, and I did do a year in AmeriCorps. I served in AmeriCorps here for the year before that. Fortunately, the bulk of that was in 2020. So any in-person meetings I would have, or events I would have missed out on, because that was such a crazy year. I don't know of any field days that we have organized as of yet. Again, I'm still new, but I know that we do have a really unique agricultural community in Lake County. It is mostly specialty crops, nurseries, vineyards, that kind of thing. So addressing that is challenging because it's not going to be the same as traditional row crops.
Yeah.
Those kinds of practices. So I know that it is true, if there are any events, sign up for our newsletters. That's where you're going to find the information. One of the things that first came to mind when we talked about events was the county fair. We could set up demonstrations because we always have the display there at the Natural Resources building. So that would be a great place to just reach out to anybody who's interested in soil health.
I know Lauren had a question. Your hand was up.
Well, I just wanted to say that Kara and I were partnered earlier, and I kind of talked about it like a fictional cover crop day. But I wanted to say that we actually are planning cover crop day next week. It was one of our farmers who does that around here offered to do that, and we partnered with the local soil and water district. So we're excited to do that and hoping that we'll have good attendance, and been trying to invite people. But I did have a question for the NRCS folks, because this morning we heard about a new system with NRCS about soil health planning, and it sounds like there's maybe a more in-depth process of monitoring that soil quality, and I just was wondering if that's something that the district conservationists are doing, or in fact, the presenter said it was just, they just learned about it yesterday. So I understand it's brand new.
The acronym that they shared, the acronym was SEMA.
Yeah, those guys must have been busy at headquarters, because we learned about some more of the details of that yesterday afternoon. So, yeah, there looks like there's going to be some opportunities to help evaluate practices after they're installed, and I think clearly soil health will be included in that. I think at this point we don't really know a lot of information about how it's going to look for us here in Ohio. I think we're excited. I think that's one of the challenges that producers have is we kind of understand the science and what should happen, but if we could get more information in the producer's hands where they could really see, some results, quantitative results that will really help implementation. So we're excited to see how that works, I guess. I don't know, Carrie, if you want to add. I'm sure you probably don't have much more to say than I did. It's very new to us too.
You did great. And yes, we have a lot more questions than answers right now, but we'll get it figured out.
Yeah.
Perhaps we could circle back and talk a little bit more about NRCS programs and dive a little deeper into tips that all of you from NRCS might have for farmers or landowners or people who are working with farmers and landowners to either make their applications or their contracts more competitive, or to provide input into the process. So I'm wondering if you could talk both about tips that you have for people who are applying for NRCS programs, and then ways that people can be involved in the NRCS process, like state technical committees.
Okay, well, I'll start first a little bit and then Eric can kind of jump in. And I don't, Barb might have some things to add on this too, I'm not sure. So I would say, first of all, there are always opportunities to be involved with NRCS. The State Technical Committee is one of them, Soil and Water Conservation District boards, FSA county committee members. You know, we all work in partnership together. And so being a part of any of those organizations allows you to be a part of what is going on at NRCS, because there's always a local input on kind of what we do and how we handle things. So in terms of being involved, we also have the Earth Team volunteer program. And so you can volunteer to be a part of what is happening at NRCS at the field level. And for some people, that's getting a chance to go out and survey a practice. And for some people, that's doing filing. It kind of depends on your interests and your physical abilities and all those awesome things. So there's lots of opportunities to participate in things NRCS does. I'm going to let Eric talk a little bit about working with someone and their application side. I could say some things about that, but I think it's better if we present it from a resource standpoint, because I think that's really where this group of people wants to be going with that.
I'm disappointed. I was hoping to go first so I could get the easy part, but she beat me to it. So no, that's a really good question. And, you know, unfortunately, in some aspects, you know, we don't have enough funds to, you know, provide financial assistance for everybody. So in a real general way, we try to get the biggest return on our investment. So our ranking process looks for a lot of times has to do with the most change, you know, so things like, you know, agreeing to go, you know, not only to cover crops, but cover crops and no-till and nutrient management, all things, you know, implementing that full suite of practices generally helps out in the ranking process. But like Carrie talked about before, you know, the way the financial assistance programs are set up with different fund pools and even different programs, it's really hard to say universally, hey, this is the secret combination of things you need to do. That's not really the way it is. But you know, the higher, the bigger stretch that producer can make, maybe, the more likely they will be to be funded. Is probably the best way to say that.
I would just add that it's always good for people to have a plan and some goals in mind. I mean, we get people that walk in the door and go, just tell me everything I can do. And the list is like, you know, it's like Santa's naughty and nice list. It's so long. People that kind of have an idea of what they want to focus on is really beneficial for us to help them get where they want to go. And we're always happy to talk about all those other areas. But for sure, if you have a goal, you want to be organic, you are transitioning to organic, you want to have a high tunnel, you want to create a pasture, whatever that thing is for you, for sure, I think it helps us if you know that when you walk in the door, or at least have some idea of it.
Mm-hmm. Emily, go ahead.
Sure. I just wanted to highlight a report that I put in the chat, and I don't know, you know, if our NRCS folks can speak to it, but the Institute for Ag and Trade Policy just came out with a report today about CSP and EQIP utilization. And I think like Ohio looks really good in terms of like, you know, the funds awarded and the competitiveness, because according to that report, at least on CSP, almost 75% of applicants receive funding, and that Ohio ranked 8th nationally in kind of the awarding of CSP contracts. So I think, you know, at least for me, that kind of makes me feel like, you know, Ohio producers stand a pretty strong chance of getting funded if they've got a good application.
Yeah, I'd say actually, I actually sent your link to Angel, our CSP program manager. I was like, hey, Amelie put this in the chat. And actually in Ohio, it's even higher than that, because they're looking at overall applications. So we have people that cancel and people that aren't eligible. And those people don't even compete for the money. You know, they don't make it that far in the process. So actually the number is quite a bit higher in Ohio to get the funds. And we've just been really lucky here that we've had a plethora of CSP funds and not as many people applying for them. We kind of have the opposite issue in EQIP a little bit. So for sure, CSP is a great way to go. It just takes a little bit of program management on the producer's part because it's a 5-year contract. So there are just things that you have to be on top of every year, but it is really a great opportunity for Ohio producers.
One thing to mention too, how H2OHIO and CSP and EQIP all kind of work together. H2OHIO, if you are in a contract, a CSP contract or an EQIP contract, and you have acres and you want to do some practices and use H2OHIO money, you can double dip, so to speak. So if those acres are already enrolled in a cover crop practice or in a no-till practice for CSP or EQIP, you're not going to, the producers aren't going to be able to get H2OHIO dollars for cover crops on those same acres. So it's something to keep in mind. Certainly not discouraging producers or directing them one way or the other. They just need to be aware that they can't get involved on the same practice on the same acres in both of those programs.
That raises a really good area of discussion, Jeff. Thanks for bringing up the idea of stacking or complementarity or, not. Carrie or someone else from NRCS, could you talk about the stackability of easements and NRCS easement dollars and conservation practice dollars? For example, if a farmer receives funding through ASAP-AL, can they also receive funding through conservation reserve program for a grassland or a waterway or something like that?
So I don't know if Barb is still on here or not.
Yes,
I'm not as
I see that she is.
good.
Yeah.
Barb, can you talk about that a little bit? I know what on my side going from EQIP to yours, but I don't know as much about if you already have an easement.
Yes, so if you already have an ASAP-AL easement, an agricultural land easement, or an FRPP, an older one, we do have the old program and the new program. If you have either one of those, you are still allowed to participate in conservation programs. So you could get an EQIP contract, you can get a CSP contract, you can get a CRP contract, and you can get those funds from those programs as well. If you have one of our other easements, the WRP, WRE program, the wetland reserve easements, or the floodplain easements, then you're not eligible for the CRP, EQIP, CSP payments. So just depends. If you have a working lands easement, the farmland easements, then you are eligible to get the conservation practices through EQIP and CSP. And even sometimes they have an impervious surface limit on them. But if you are following the NRCS standards and specifications, you can, under certain circumstances, exceed the impervious surface limit too. So that shouldn't be a hindrance to that. So yeah, if you have an AO easement, then you are still eligible for our programs.
One of the questions that has come up is when in either a new easement or an existing easement, if there's a requirement to comply with a conservation plan, who does the oversight of the compliance and make sure that the practices that are laid out in a conservation plan are being followed? And I wonder if NRCS can talk about once an initial contract period is over, or once an initial plan is set forth, whether NRCS is in a position to ensure compliance with that on an ongoing basis, or how does that usually work?
So this is Barb again. So again, it depends on the type of easement that you have. If it's a WRE easement, WRP easement, or another one to which NRCS is the steward of the easement, then NRCS will enforce those conservation plans, the rules of the easement. If it is another one where NRCS is just the third-party right holder, which is the AL easements and some of the FRPP easements, then it is up to the land trust or whoever is the easement holder to enforce the rules associated with that deed. So sometimes it's ODA, sometimes it's the local land trust. So they're the first rights, they have the first duty to enforce the rules of the easement. And then if they fail to do that, then NRCS can step in and take over that part. But then in the event that a land trust doesn't follow through with enforcing the rules of the easement for a long period of time, the various easements, you know, they will inhibit their ability to get easements in the future and get funding from us in the future. So the first line of enforcement goes to the land trust and then it comes to us. But I will say that most of the time we work in concert with the local land trust or ODA to make sure that we're all on the same page with when we're telling folks, hey, this isn't allowed. We've talked to each other first before the land trust says, yeah, that's not allowed. So.
One question that I have for all of you in Ohio is coming from a very cow-heavy state in Wisconsin. I wondered if you could talk about the role of animal agriculture in Ohio and the potential benefit of manure. I will say I talk to farmers who tell me with some regularity that's the field where all the manure from the dairy farm went, and we haven't had dairy cows for 20 years, and it's still my best producing field. And I've heard that enough to know that there is something really significant there. There's something a little bit magical about cow manure in that case. And it can create some real challenges in large volumes and in the wrong place. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of trends of incorporating animals into a diversified rotation, ways that manure can be used beneficially, and important practices when it comes to livestock.
I'll start off. So our division regulates animal manure from non-permitted farms. So I think it's 800 head or less, or 700 less of dairy cattle, and then 2,400 or less of hog barns. But in general, when we're talking about soil health, the manure offers great opportunities when you're looking at what you're putting out there from a nutrient management standpoint, because you're getting a lot of beneficial aspects that are not in commercial fertilizers. And so when we look at commercial fertilizers, a lot of what we're getting is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and then some microbes. We're getting countless additional micro elements or micronutrients when we're talking about manure that those fertilizers cannot supply unless you go ahead and purchase them. So in discussion with a lot of soil health proponents, they think manure or integrating animals into their operation is certainly the best thing they can do to improve soil health, because they're putting manure back on the landscape and not using synthetic fertilizers. So from that aspect, it's a very positive thing for improving soil health. The negative side that we see is that we regulate ag pollution abatement here in the state of Ohio. So we see the negative sides of manure, where we see applications discharge into waters of the state, and then we have to come out and enforce the rules that we have here in Ohio to address those manure complaints. So that is the negative side of it. That is all too often here in Northwest Ohio. We see the manure on the front page of the local newspapers or on the TV, and it shows the negative sides of manure and not the positives of manure. And so we're fully aware of it here, specifically in Northwest Ohio, but across the state. It is not just an isolated thing here in Northwest Ohio. We see pollution complaints across the state, and most of the time it's just it's accidental, or it is the mismanagement of manure. So the more effectively we can manage manure is a positive thing. And so that's one of the aspects of H2OHIO is to hopefully move it away from those fields like you were talking about, Kara, that may have got manure for 30, 40, 50 years straight, which we would call legacy fields from a phosphorus management standpoint. They have built up nutrient levels to a point where we don't need to put any nutrients out there. They have built up to such a level that we don't need to put any additional nutrients out there. So we have provided incentive. I know NRCS has provided incentive in the past to utilize that manure elsewhere on a lower soil testing field where you can receive greater benefit for taking those nutrients elsewhere. And so I think that's some aspects of these type of cost share programs that can better utilize the nutrients where they can see a greater benefit. And so I think that's probably the biggest aspect of it. Just the manure in general, it can do great things for soil health and nutrient management.
Yeah, and just to follow up on what Kip said, manure is kind of the tale of in some ways two different things. The potential to improve soil health is like Kip said, the secondary and micronutrients that you're going to get in manure, some of the some of those nutrients are going to be in more organic form and release slower over time. But the other thing that we need to think about is, those livestock are serving almost as an inoculation to your field to increase your microbial biomass and that diversity in the microbes, which again is one of the goals. One of the things I think that we should be cautioned by a little bit here in Ohio that's a little bit unique, and it kind of goes back to some of the things that Steve talked about at the very beginning, thinking about our soils. We hear a lot of people within the soil health community talk about, improving or introducing grazing livestock on annually planted crops, which there is a lot of great benefits to that. But one of the things you need to think about when considering doing that is, those annual crop fields don't have the trafficability of those permanent pastures. We get a lot of rainfall here in Ohio. A lot of times it comes all in one time. So you got to have a place to put those livestock for those days at which it is just too wet to have your livestock in your crop fields, because they're going to do much more damage in terms of compaction in a real short period of time if you have them out there in that situation. So, manure is a great value and a great resource that a lot of producers have. And if they don't have livestock, and they're in the need of the primary nutrients, phosphorus and potassium, I think we should be talking and encouraging producers to reach out to their neighbors and utilize that source, because of all these other benefits that kind of come along when you compare it to commercial fertilizer. So that is a good component of a soil health system is some routine or some occasional manure use or occasional grazing in the right situations.
What we've found in through the H2OHIO program, so Kip mentioned that there's a variable rate phosphorus BMP for that best management practice. What we've found more than a few times in Putnam County, where the producer signed up for that practice, then they need to do a grid soil sample. And when they get those grid soil samples back, they notice there's some areas in the farm that are very high in phosphorus, like these other two had mentioned. And you start having a discussion with them, and they say, "Oh yeah, that you know, that's where the old laying house was. You know, back in Putnam County in the 40s, 50s. You know, there wasn't uncommon for a lot of the farms to have small chicken coops or dairy farms. And of course, you know, on a nice sunny Saturday in the wintertime or the fall, the ground was still frozen, and Dad said, "Let's go out. You know, it's a good time to clean out the pen." So that's what you did. Dad had tractor drivers on a Saturday morning, and you went out and you cleaned out the free stalls, you cleaned out the barn, and you put it in an area where, you know, you always put it on top of the hill because that's where it was the driest, and you could put it out there. Well, you start seeing those show up. You keep doing that over decades, and then even though the livestock has left the farm now and they just do row crop agriculture, as you mentioned, Kara, those levels are still elevated. So when they do some of these other practices, like our more technology in our agriculture now allows us to pinpoint some areas that need more fertilizer and areas that don't, we've found that those areas that are high more than a few times are the areas where they used to have that legacy phosphorus, that legacy manure applied in the past. So, you know, that's something we're seeing too through the H2OHIO program. And I think it's a good thing. You know, the more education, the more data they have, they can make better decisions. So.
One of the things we talked about earlier today was the gradient of new practice adoption, and that there are always going to be some people who are the early adopters. They're the first ones to try something new, and the majority of people are in the middle, and then there's some people who are going to be, you know, have to have every question answered and every box checked before they try something new. For those of you who work directly with farmers, I'm curious to hear any stories that come to mind for you about what made the light bulb go on for someone. What made someone go from skeptical or uncertain to, yeah, I'm willing to try that.
Yeah, I'll speak just real briefly on that. I think it really depends on the individual. You know, sometimes it might be a financial assistance programs, kind of getting them, you know, to take away some of those economic risk, and then they try it out and they see, you know, a lot of the things that we've talked about today in any of our programs all are sound practices that I am confident that, you know, the producer will continue to do them without our financial assistance. You know, you think about the variable rate and for fertilizer applications, cover crops, if done in a good way, will pay back more than they cost. And ultimately, I think sometimes we've got to recognize that sometimes these producers are struggling in a lot of their decisions. Are going to come down to the economics. You'll very rarely find a producer that feels good at the end of the day if he's losing his farm, has to sell his farm, and he won't say, but at least I managed it in a good way. You know, that's a lot of what's making these decisions. And I think we all can work together and help these producers meet all their goals.
I think that is one of the roadblocks to implementing some of these different practices is the financial hurdle they have to jump. I mean, equipment costs are through the roof. I mean, a couple 100 horsepower tractors, $250,000. A combine is, by the time you get both headers, is close to $1 million. When you're talking about technology and utilizing technology to implement some of these practices, there are some big hurdles there. And so a lot of times those cost share programs help them say, okay, if that's there, I can implement this new practice, because otherwise they might not be able to get it into that program. And so I guess that's one way we see it. And here of the good stories that we can tell again is because of our program, they were able to put this modification on their planter, to put fertilizer down at a different time of the year to reduce tillage. And so hearing those stories and letting them share those stories out to others, I think are those opportunities that we are able to present to producers. And so anytime you have a share like this, it opens up that door to a lot of producers. We do have a lot of funds right now with H2OHIO, so it has made things a lot easier. But word of mouth has definitely got producers involved that might not have been involved. Maybe Jeff can share on this. He may have had producers that it would never come to the door for a past program, but because other farmers were talking about it, or that coffee shop talk was occurring, they went and signed up. And we may have had some that signed up that wasn't their cup of tea. Building programs is difficult. Make a program fit a large geography like Northwest Ohio is difficult. So there are all programs that some producers may not have anything that.
Well, one of the things I'd like to support, what Eric and Kip have both shared in terms of the profitability piece, which of course is always important. It's interesting. We did a project a few years ago where we interviewed a bunch of the pioneers here in Ohio with the organic program, which again, the organic program has incorporated a lot of the practices that we're now trying to incentivize with some of these programs. And, the farmers who really started doing this 25, 30 years ago, a lot of them started doing it because they saw changes in their soil biology, in the soil life. They saw a reduction in earthworms and other soil biological activity that they didn't like. And a lot of the farmers interviewed said that they saw either themselves or their family members come down with illnesses that they attributed to some of the synthetics that were being used on the farm. So that was really a strong motivator for a lot of the folks who pioneered some of these practices years ago. But I'd also just say, I think, the incentivization, probably not the right word, incentivizing these practices, I think is just so critical because, I know with organic transition and even with, stacking some of these practices that, non-organic producers are doing, they take time, right? Like it takes time before you see those results. And so if you're able to incentivize these practices for 3 to 5 years, for example, so that they can start seeing those soil health benefits, it's just really critical because I think sometimes we're so focused on the short term, right? Like if we don't see that change in a year, forget it. And sometimes it takes more than a year to see these kind of the long-term changes, especially if we've been using practices that aren't very supportive of soil health for a long time.
I think I saw some statistics a couple years ago saying that near half the acres in the Western Lake Erie Basin are rented acres. So you have absentee landowners. So it's important to, if you get a producer who's good at managing the soil resources and good at managing the manure resources, you know, the other farmers, they watch what's going on. They'll drive down the road and they spend as much time looking at the neighbor's cornfield as they do theirs as they're driving by. The Nature Conservancy has a program. It's called the Farmer Advocate Program. So it's their idea is to get some producers who are willing. We're doing some good practices and that are willing to talk about it. Sometimes farmers do good practices, but they're not, you know, they're not the best at articulating their thoughts, or they feel maybe they can't get up in front of a group and talk. So programs like that shine a light on the producers who are doing good, and then find the ones who want to step up and talk, and that's a challenge. So education is a big part of that. But you have someone who has success, and at the district level, you know, we try to lift them up, you know, try to not every practice is successful, and they have to go through maybe a list of practices that aren't successful until they find one that works. And when you find that, as a district technician, when you find that producer and they come in and talk about it, you want to be even more supportive towards them and get them to tell their story. So I think you know, that's a big deal too, to get the farmers to tell their story, and you know, getting those programs like the Farmer Advocate Program to be widely adopted. I think that would go a long way, because there's only so much that the district, that NRCS, that ODA, we're selling programs, right? So people have an idea of, when they come in the office, what we're going to tell them. But the producers, that when you sit down and have a beer with them and they talk on the back patio, they're not trying to sell anything. They're basically just talking about what they're doing. So that's, I think, to find those producers that are willing to step out, maybe out of their comfort zone in a lot of cases, to be the advocates to quote unquote sell the programs. You know, I think that's important too, to find those diamonds in the rough, so to speak, and have them tell the story.
Jeff, that's so on point that you bring up the topic of non-operating landowners. I know that's a perennial question or issue for easement holders. So this is a question for Caitlin, Michelle, Caitlin, Brock, Maria, Lauren, those of you who steward easements and monitor easements. Talk a little bit about what you see as the particular challenge related to soil health for non-operating landowners, and what have you experienced there? And where do you think that NRCS or state agencies or counties could help?
I think personally, I mean, we haven't really experienced it too much because we typically go for landowners that are farming their own land, but I feel like some of them just wouldn't care since they're not the ones actually farming the land. Like, we're putting an easement on a property right now, and it's two older ladies that I don't think would, I mean, they trust the farmer that he's doing what he should be doing. But when we went out there, he had like removed a bunch of trees and stuff and like left a mess. And I was like, probably shouldn't trust him. But I think a lot of them is going to be hard for them because they just kind of hand that off to someone. And it's typically, just for the ones I have off the top of my head, a woman that owns the property. So I feel like that will be a challenge, because right now we were kind of focusing on properties where the farmer owns like a bunch of land that he's farming.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Mm-hmm.
We also just kind of have like a lot of those older generational farmers that I think the best way to explain it is kind of like set in their ways. You know, they're going to be a little hesitant to make changes. So I do think that'll probably be the biggest obstacle for us. It definitely does help to have the relationship with some of them where, you know, they're a little more approachable than others. So I think it's just finding the right way to kind of like introduce those or kind of bring up those conversations. But yeah, I think we do have an opportunity, though, a good opportunity when we get out there in the field and stuff to do that. It's just a matter of, yeah, finding the best strategy as far as bringing that up. And but we're hopeful.
We've run into the same situation where most of the landowners that aren't working their farm anymore is because they've gotten a little too on in years to be able to do it. And that also means they're from that older generation that Maria was talking about. And though they really, really care about the land, they just might not know how to properly take care of the soil and make sure that it's functioning properly. So I think it's just passing along this education of soil health without being demeaning or acting like we know more about their farm than they do. Kind of finding that balance, I think, is going to be how we're going to move forward with those landowners.
I agree. I think it'll be a challenge for sure to get comfortable bringing those kinds of things up, especially with like a lot of the ones that I have in mind, you know. So, but yeah.
I would just add that in the area where we have our Rcpp grant, we've already been working on a lot of soil health education in that area. And so what we're seeing are the landowners who don't farm really are struggling with how to negotiate with their farmer. So that information we got earlier today on leases, I think is going to be really helpful. But they have found that they have to kind of learn on their own, like, how do we figure out what the costs are and how much I can reduce your rent so that you will get on board with some of these different conservation practices. And so, you know, it's kind of interesting because we've got quite a lot of owners who want to see change, but just don't know how to approach their farmer. And you know, these are a lot of times family relationships. These relationships go back decades. You know, their grandpa farmed with my grandpa, and you don't want to just fire your farmer, but they are anxious to see change. So I think some of those relationship issues could be helpful for these guys to figure out.
I want to just thank you all for sharing that. And I think what I'm filing away in my head is that this is an area where we can continue the conversation, as you know, as we promise that this soil health stewards training won't be the end of the conversation, but rather the beginning. What sort of resources can we offer to help non-operating landowners feel empowered to have that conversation and to know what they're suggesting is reasonable, and feel on firm footing when they come to that negotiating conversation. I had one last question, circling back to Emily, in your observations about, or the survey about organic early adopters. One of the things that is true in Wisconsin is that there is a certain percentage of organic farmers in Wisconsin who went to organic practices specifically because they didn't want to participate in government conservation programs. It's a little bit of a libertarian streak. And I'm curious whether that is true in Ohio as well, whether there's an element of people saying, I want to make money at farming. I don't want to have to rely on government payments, whether it's NRCS or crop insurance or FSA programs. So I'm going to find a way to do it that makes money without government subsidies. Is that element true in Ohio as well?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Kara. I don't know if that's why a lot of these producers have become organic, but I will say that in the surveys I've done with some of our growers, there's definitely a strong libertarian streak, but I also would qualify that and say that, you know, we have a large amount of plain community farmers as well. And because of their background, they just, you know, they do not participate in government programming. So that's a lot of it as well.